Aria was walking the flight line alone as the first hints of dawn showed up on the horizon, her feet barely scraping the sun-baked concrete. Her flight suit was already gross with sweat and dust, and the back of her neck was slick under her braided hair. She was carrying her helmet under one arm, the visor down, and the outside of it was buffed up, not for looks, but for real. Across the runway, a gust of wind spun sand into a slow, swirly mess, catching the early light, then just kind of fading away. She didn't look up. Honestly, she probably knew what the sky was gonna throw at her today. It hadn't changed. Her F-16 was sitting there at the far end of the runway, nose pointed towards the hazy blue. The weapons were already loaded up. The twin racks under each wing were gleaming in the rising sun. The flaps were locked, and the targeting systems were on, but quiet. A tech guy on the ground stepped away from the ladder as Aria got close, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. He just nodded without talking, the kind of greeting you give someone whose mind is already way off somewhere else. Aria stopped next to the left air intake and put her free hand on the metal surface. It felt warm. Systems were all checked out. Nothing was gonna surprise her inside. That didn't make her feel better, not really. It just confirmed she was ready, and that's all she needed. If you're into survival stories and stuff that inspires you, definitely hit that subscribe button for truth in the mirror and see real strength through the eyes of these quiet heroes. In the hangar office before dawn, the final briefing was quick. Intel had spotted a high-value enemy commander at a fortified desert base. The window of opportunity was super narrow. The convoy was getting ready to roll. Once they moved, the trail would go cold. Air defenses were thick. Enemy interceptors were already up in the air. No messing around, no circling. The attack had to be sudden, precise, and final. Command had made it clear. There was a high chance Aria wouldn't be coming back. They said that 3 times. She didn't ask questions. She didn't answer. She just nodded once, then left the room. Now, on the flight line, a jet was warming up in front of her. The flight chief walked over slowly, deliberately. For a few seconds, he didn't say anything. Then he pointed to the ground vehicle holding the optional wing fuel tank. "We can hook up the extra fuel," he said, "if you think you might need the time in the end." Aria glanced at the tank, then back at him. Her answer was quiet, "Won't need it." The chief studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod and turned away. No trying to convince her, no arguing, just understanding. She climbed the ladder silently. The steps were hot. Her movements were steady, practiced. She settled into the cockpit and started buckling up without a pause. The checklist was clipped to the left panel. She didn't touch it. She'd already run through everything twice in her head. She reached for each switch without hesitation. Power hummed softly through the systems. She sealed her gloves, tightened her harness, and pulled her helmet down. The visor stayed down. Beyond the nose of the plane, the desert was starting to glow. The top edge of the cloud line had turned pale gold. Just above the horizon, a heat shimmer had started to dance. She didn't react to the view. She looked at it like she was already somewhere else. Detached, she punched in the start sequence. The turbines spooled up with a rising series of notes that didn't need translation anymore. She didn't flinch when the engine stabilized. Her fingers moved quickly, cleanly, confirming readings by instinct, not caution. Every system lit up green, then held steady. The tower gave her clearance for takeoff over the radio. She didn't answer. There was nothing else to say. Aria taxied, the nose wheel spinning with a smooth resistance under her touch. Her hand rested on the throttle with a familiarity that had taken years to build. As she passed the row of hangars, she saw a single crewman looking out from behind a dusty windshield. The rest of the base seemed still, like it was paused in the heat. At the end of the runway, she brought the jet to a full stop. The silence inside the cockpit was only broken by the low hum of the electronics and a faint rush of air against the canopy. She checked the targeting pod once briefly, then centered her grip and flexed her right hand. She pushed the throttle forward. The afterburner kicked in with a muffled roar behind her. The fighter jet shot forward, wheels screaming on the concrete, acceleration building fast. Aria said nothing. Her gaze was fixed as the blur of the desert pulled away beneath her, then disappeared completely. The sky didn't welcome her. It made no promises. She climbed anyway. Aria scraped the edge of a canyon wall, her left wingtip just a breath away from the crumbling rock. The desert below was broken up with ridges and dry veins of chalk and rust. What used to be ancient riverbeds were now just scars on the earth. Her jet moved like it was threading through the terrain, too fast to track, too low to mark. Heat shimmers warped the horizon, turning the sky and ground into a blurry mess. Inside the cockpit, her breath was a faint pulse in her ears, a steady rhythm against the hum of the systems and the sound of stressed metal. She hadn't spoken since takeoff. There was nothing to say. The flight plan was living inside her, not on the instruments. It was muscle and memory, not some prediction. When the GPS flickered, she didn't react. Her route was already set by the topography etched in her mind. One glance forward told her everything she needed. The first early warning radar came in like whispers, soft pulses along the edge of threat coverage. Faint, then gone. She throttled back just enough to hide her signature, but didn't lose speed. Up ahead, a line of sharp granite outcroppings jutted above the valley. Her HUD suggested a climb. She ignored it and dropped lower, flying between stone columns that hadn't seen rain in 100 years. The terrain-following sensors offered suggestions. Aria chose her own line instead. A canyon split curved sharply left. She entered the turn without hesitation. The aircraft reacted instantly, G-forces pressing hard against her ribs and shoulders, her gloved hand tightening on the stick. Steady and precise. Wind slapped from the right, pushing her towards the rock wall. She corrected with a touch of rudder. No wasted motion, no drift. There was no sound in her headset. No radar link was tracking her path. She was beyond the range of support systems. Everything the commander could see was hours old. She was looking at now. She glanced at a ridge marker, a twisted section of sand-colored basalt, and adjusted her heading by 2 degrees. From memory, not the HUD. Another radar ping. Stronger, closer. She didn't flinch. Instead, she put the defensive suite into passive mode, letting the signal reflect off the back coverage. No missiles yet. They were watching, not shooting. Aria stayed low, still invisible, but just barely. The sun climbed higher, light spreading into the canyon at a blinding angle. Shadows shortened. The terrain got even rougher. She passed over a dry wash where sun-bleached wires were half buried in the sand. A cloud of birds scattered as she flew over. The heat inside the cockpit was stifling. Sweat was running down her jaw under the helmet's seal. She let it drip from the rear camera feed. A flicker, she tapped the zoom control. 2 dots, then 3. Enemy fighters were coming. Radar was tracking them now. She knew the formation was breaking fast with wide coverage. They'd launched early. She was boxed in, not engaged yet, but marked. Her instructor's voice popped into the back of her mind, a phrase she'd heard on her first live flight. "You're always the slowest thing on someone else's radar." Aria didn't smile. She just held her altitude. A new tone spread across her panel. "Sam, acquire. Close. Too close." The lock warning intensified, but only for a second. One of their launchers was hidden behind a rock shelf, partially obscured. Aria banked hard left, pushing into the canyon's shadow line. The warning flickered again, then vanished. No launch. She'd flown under it just in time. She stabilized and moved faster. The enemy fighters were closer now. Her system showed them clearly. 3 contacts approaching from separate angles. They'd get a tone in minutes. She still didn't climb. The bomb run was almost here. If she turned to fight now, the mission would be lost. The target would escape behind a wall of terrain and signal jamming. The opening would close forever. She pressed forward. Below her, the landscape flattened out. The last ridge was behind her. The terrain opened up into a wide, scorched area filled with debris, fences and camouflage netting pulled tight over vehicles. At the center was the compound, low buildings with slanted roofs, a makeshift tower, and rows of transport trucks idling along a road barely wide enough to hold them all. It looked like every other remote outpost Aria had seen from above, but this one held the target. The targeting pod locked on, and her HUD lit up green. The box formed and stabilized, centered over the largest structure. No movement yet, no signal that they knew she was there. Aria flipped open the cover of the bomb release button. Her hand hovered over it. The nose of the fighter dipped slightly as she aligned the attack. Behind her, a rising chorus of tones. The enemy fighters were locked on. She didn't flinch. She didn't stern. She didn't speak. Her eyes were fixed on the target, her thumb ready. Let them come. The targeting reticle glowed steady green. Aria pressed her thumb down on the release button with calm certainty. Two guided bombs separated cleanly from their pylons, fins extending as they tumbled down through the thick vibration. She held the aircraft steady for a count of 3, confirming the angle on the HUD. Then she pulled up hard. The nose shot up sharply. The sky ahead went blinding white. Gravity pressed against her chest as the ground vanished below. Threat warnings shrieked in her headset, alarms vying for volume. She manually silenced them. Not disabled, just muted. Enough to think. From the frame of the rear camera feed, she saw the first shockwave bloom silently upward. Then the sound hit, muffled and dense, more a feeling than a volume as it passed through the airframe. A structure within the command folded inward, collapsing in sections. A fireball jumped across the netting, tearing through rows of parked trucks. Clouds of dust and debris curled into the air like unraveling rope. Secondary flashes chased each other in the central courtyard. The entire command area was ripped apart. Aria exhaled once. She didn't speak. 3 enemy aircraft were now closing from the rear. Her HUD tracked them in formation. 1 fighter had already locked and fired. Aria banked left, deployed 2 countermeasures, and watched the sky behind her light up with twin streaks. 1 missile passed directly overhead. The others hesitated, waiting for cleaner solutions. She climbed again, trading speed for position. It wouldn't last long, but it gave her altitude and, with it, visibility. Then, through the haze of smoke, she saw it. A second aircraft rose into view. Smaller, faster. It was a twin-engine transport. Its fuselage was dark, warped with heat. Low contrast paint blending with the haze. It had cleared the far perimeter from a hidden strip carved just beyond the main compound. Its wheels lifted off the ground with a shudder. The nose dipped forward. Its engines burned hot. Someone was trying to get away. Aria leveled her climb and turned towards the center. One of the enemy fighters closed the gap. It locked, fired, and watched its missile arc fast and sharp towards the target's belly. The explosion came hard, fast. There was no trail of debris, just a detonation, and then pieces scattering in the wind. The remaining fighters stayed behind, their angles closed. Aria dove, forcing them to follow. Her warning system lit up with a new lock. It wasn't air-to-air, it was ground-based. To the east, a mobile SAM battery had opened up. She ignored the signal. She couldn't afford to turn. Not yet. The transport was gaining speed. It had turned east, already in a steep climb. Its nose was pointed at open sky. No escort, no defense. They were counting on stealth and distance. Aria switched to visual targeting. Her HUD flickered with static from the jamming. She didn't try to correct it. She adjusted manually, flying without layers, calculating angles in her head as she corrected the pitch with one hand. Distance, crosswind, altitude. She stabilized the aircraft with her knees locked tight. Her right hand rested on the final rail trigger. Behind her, the fighters kept closing. Her radar glowed yellow, then red. The missile tone came back. It whined in her helmet. She ignored it. Her eyes stayed on the escaping transport. Its heat signature blurred its outline, but she saw enough. She focused beyond the distortion. She flew the gap, She fired. The missile separated from the rail without ceremony. There was no burst of sound, just a sudden absence. She tracked it with her eyes. An arc, a correction, then a direct hit, mid-fuselage. The transport broke in two, flames erupting in both directions, the tail falling first, then the wings peeling backward. The entire aircraft folded into the plumes of dust it had tried rise above. Aria didn't smile. She banked. The fighters behind her grew bolder. One fired. The other closed even faster. Gunfire whispered past her canopy. She dove again, sharp and sudden, dropping low over the rough terrain. The radar lock shifted. She pulled harder. Heat radiated into the cockpit. A warning light came on. Engine temp spike. Fuel flow was erratic. Still she flew. She dropped below radar level, just above the top line of the RGE line. Shrubs and dry grass blurred past. A cluster of low rock blurred below her nose. She held her wings steady. The engine coughed once, then caught itself. Alarms blared again. Not critical yet, but close. Her rear camera still showed smoke rising over the base. Nothing moved within that haze. The commander's plane wouldn't be landing. The base wasn't standing anymore. The fighters chasing her were behind schedule, forced to climb again. She'd scraped their net, but only for now. She throttled down to minimum and let the aircraft glide on the low wind, catching a thermal just shy of the canyon wall's base, holding her level. The silence was almost total now, just the hum of stressed metal and the low whine of systems trying to keep up. Aria didn't speak. She didn't change her expression. The flight path was etched across the sky, marked by trails of smoke, burn marks, and a dozen broken targets. And she was still flying towards the next thing. Aria pointed her nose at the falling debris, confirming with her eyes what her systems couldn't show anymore. The transport had gone down hard. Smoke spiraled up from the canyon wall where the wreckage spread uphill in flames. No signal, no movement. The target was gone. Then the next threat hit. Her radar lit up with overlapping tones. This time, not just air-to-air. Along the mouth of the valley, just ahead of her projected escape route, a second wave of SAM acquisitions had gone active. The system screened for a full priority lock. Aria banked hard right and dove into a cut between the RG lines. The new path barely scraped a ridge of shale and wind-polished sand. The lock held. A missile launched. She kicked out her countermeasures, dropping flares mid-turn. Two bright explosions spiraled away from her tail. The first missile followed a flare and disappeared in a cloud of light. The second held its course. Aria gained altitude, scraping the edge of a rock shelf, and curved in under the next rise. The missile hesitated for a breath, then slammed into a rock face in a wide turn and exploded. The flash of the explosion washed her canopy white for half a second. She blinked once. The image cleared. Her hands never left the controls, but the countermeasure count was almost gone. If another lock came, she had nothing left to give. A second jolt spread through the cockpit. Her HUD went dark. Power cut across the panel. Aria checked the side screens. Multiple sensor failures. One processor offline. The second was overheating. Cooling flow had stayed on. The warning panel flashed avionics degradation warning, then restarted itself. She smelled burned insulation through her oxygen mask. She didn't slow her pace through the canopy glass. The sky stretched flat and unforgiving. Sunlight filtered through dust and carbon smoke, frosting every ridge with a shimmering edge. Aria pulled her visor down and let the aircraft just cruise on the lines. No altitude margin, no instruments. She flew by instinct and line of sight. Another flash to the east. She caught it out of the corner of her eye. Wrong shape, wrong path. A single aircraft, light and fast, trying to hide its escape, not part of the intercept group. It had purpose, just outside the expected pattern. She went after it. The aircraft banked to escape, but it was too late. It hadn't expected her to still be in the air. She adjusted the course in a smooth arc, nose straight, throttle steady. Her controls were slower to react now, every surface moving with effort. Hydraulics were lagging, reaction time was diminishing. She opened the cover on the last missile rail. The bay was cracked. The indicator showed no lock. The system had given up helping. Aria didn't wait. She centered the target visually, aligning it between two scratches on her canopy. She straightened her wings and flew parallel, letting the path settle into the bones of the road. The distance, the crosswind, the altitude. She calculated it all herself. She fired. The missile detached from the rail unceremonious. No sound, no visual, just the vibration of the weight leaving the steel. It moved toward the escaping jet. No lock, no guidance. Still, it hit. The enemy aircraft took the impact just below the engine. One wing folded, the other ripped away wide and disintegrated. The fuselage twisted in the air, turning into fire and fell in a slow spiral toward the desert below. No flash when it hit, just dust and a shadow. Aria broke away from the smoke cloud and turned back toward the canyon floor. But the damage had caught up to her. Smoke seeped from behind the canopy seals. One of the internal oxygen scrubbers popped, filling the space behind her helmet with a thin gray haze. The canopy frame cracked from heat stress. Small cracks webbed across the top edge of her instrument panel. One of the side panels blew out and hung loosely. She dropped lower again, flying just above the terrain. No signal, no data, just the low wind and the heat reflecting off the rock. Her warnings returned in one final string. Electrical draw critical, fuel below threshold, systems corrupted. She shut down every unnecessary function, pulling circuit breakers by hand, by feel. Still, she flew. No comms, no uplift, no AWACS. If anyone was watching, they couldn't reach her. The only sound was the pulse of the airframe under pressure, and the faint whine of the last working air intake. Below, the landscape narrowed into a tight valley. She found the center line and followed the descent, tracking a dry streambed with rocks lining both sides. Her aircraft was pitching from nose to tail, but she held control. Sunlight hit the panel in thin streaks. Her visor was streaked now, salt and soot caked to its edge. Her eyes burned. She blinked twice and held her course. No more targets, no more attack. The mission was done, but she didn't stop. Every movement of her hand had weight. Every shift on the rudder mattered. The aircraft wasn't obeying anymore. She was forcing it. When the throttle stuck, she jammed it with her elbow. When the stick pushed back, she held it forward. There was no panic, no braking, just flying. The valley passed in long shadow. The engine burned irregularly, long curls of smoke rising behind her. She watched the canyon walls open further, light spreading back across the ground. The jet was braking, but Aria wasn't. The canyon stretched ahead like a broken sea. Aria held the glide steady, the stick vibrating under her palm. The engine was sputtering behind her, the tone erratic. Low-pressure fuel alarms flashed on the center panel, which was starting to blacken at the edges. The right air intake made a hollow rattling sound in the turbulence. The aircraft was fragile, as if it had flown beyond its natural limit and was just waiting for her to let go. She checked the terrain again. The streambed below was rough, narrow in places, sloped on both sides, but it was the only option she had. At one point it widened just enough. No runway, no margin, just dirt, shale and scattered brush. She didn't hesitate. Aria flipped open the manual trim panel. The auto systems had gone completely quiet about 5 minutes ago. Her left hand moved across the buttons one by one, adjusting the descent manually. The wings shuddered with the flap change. Hydraulic assist lagged as the jet dipped slightly right. She corrected, bringing it back to centerline. Altitude dropping, airspeed bleeding off. There was no time for another pass. She dumped the fuel. The gauge flickered low, then flashed and went dark. Smoke curled into the cockpit. The lower instruments were completely off. One frozen screen still showed terrain she'd passed 10 minutes ago. Another flashed static gray and faded. She didn't bother looking again. The streambed was coming into view. Aria dropped the landing gear out of habit, knowing it wouldn't respond. It didn't. She leaned slightly into the seat, not for support, but to align herself. Her right boot adjusted the rudder. Her eyes stayed fixed forward. The moment came without warning. Contact was sudden and violent. The aircraft slammed into the canyon floor, the nose landing gear folding with a deep crunch. The fuselage shuddered and twisted, throwing sparks onto the rocks. One wing hit a rock outcropping and tore away with a screaming twist of metal. The jet skidded sideways, the belly grinding on the ground. Dust and dirt rose into the air like a wall. It half spun, then slammed hard left and stopped. Silence followed. Inside the cockpit, Aria's helmet gently tapped the headrest. Her visor was cracked diagonally. She reached out, found the battery cut off by touch, and threw it. The aircraft groaned once as power withdrew. She moved slowly, checking her limbs as she unbuckled her harness. Her knee ached. No brakes, no blood. Her shoulder had hit the console, but it still moved. The canopy release system was jammed. She tried again. It came open on the second pull. Heat flooded into the cockpit, thick with the smell of burned wiring, hydraulic fluid and dust. She sat for a moment, eyes closed behind the cracked visor, then opened them and climbed out the side of the broken fuselage. The canyon was still quiet. No echoes, no rotors, no boots on gravel. Just the breeze and the faint ticking of cooling metal in the sun. Aria stepped onto the dirt. Her foot sank half an inch into the soft stuff. She tested her other leg. It held. Her gloves were blackened with soot. Her sleeves were torn at the elbows. She scanned the horizon. Nothing moved. The wreckage lay behind her in jagged pieces. A wing rested against a sharp rock. The tail section was buried at an odd angle near a dry log. A landing gear strut lay detached beside a twisted engine cowling, no flames, just smoke. She walked 10 paces and dropped her helmet in the dust. The ground was hot under her boots. Her hands hung free at her sides. She turned in a slow arc, searching for the ridgeline, not for aid or rescue, but to understand where she'd landed. Aria sat on a flat rock across from the wreckage. Her legs were heavy now, but not shaky. She adjusted her harness across her chest and loosened one glove. The other stayed on. Her breathing returned to normal. No words came. There was no need. Behind her, the jet made no sound, just the silent hum of hot metal and the occasional contraction of steel. The checklist was still folded in her seat pocket, untouched. She looked at the sky once. It was pale and empty. No rotors, no engines, no urgency. Stars were beginning to show through the last haze of heat. They twinkled faintly, distant and undisturbed. Aria didn't smile. She didn't sigh. She just looked. The aircraft waited behind her. The checklist remained folded, and Aria stood as quiet and ready as she had that morning when she launched. Rescue came just before the heat peaked. Aria heard the rotor sound before she saw the aircraft. A forward team landed in a compact tiltrotor, the props slicing the sky with brutal efficiency. Dust spiraled into the canyon, coating the ground in a brown haze. A crewman jumped out, weapons slung, eyes still scanning like he expected chaos. But Aria was already standing. Her flight suit was streaked with dust and ash. Her gloves were blackened with soot. Her visor was removed, and the cracked helmet hung loosely from her left hand. In her other hand, still neatly folded, was the checklist. She gave a single nod as she walked towards them. There was no limp, no questions, no looking back. They didn't ask if she was hurt. She didn't say if she was in the tiltrotor. Nobody spoke. The team made way for her. She buckled in and looked straight ahead. The canyon vanished behind them, but Aria didn't watch it go. Back at the forward base, the air was still heavy with the afternoon heat. A pair of medics waited by the landing pad, their gloves already on. Aria walked down the ramp before it was fully extended. The crew chief tried to direct her to the aid station, but she just shook her head once. The message was clear. She passed through the arched doorway and entered the shadowed corridor of operations. Her flight suit bore the marks of the fight, torn fabric on one shoulder, faint burns near the forearm seams, a dried liquid stain near her lower ribs, where the instrument panel had blown out. Her boots left small red tracks of canyon dust on the polished floor. The briefing room was silent, the screens dark, no conversation, just a metal table and 4 chairs. Aria sat when instructed. She set her helmet beside her, The checklist flat on the table. It remained closed. The senior officer asked for her debrief. She rattled off the flight plan deviations. She listed the radar contact points. She detailed the bomb release timing, the vector of her secondary attack, and the location of the final missile impact. She named the threats, identified the weapons used, and confirmed the enemy commander's aircraft was destroyed in the air. Her voice never rose, never fell. It proceeded like her aircraft, clean, necessary, control. When she finished, the officer took off his glasses and studied her for a moment longer than necessary. He folded his hands and said, "Your actions ensured the neutralization of the target. The mission was executed under extreme conditions, and your decisions in flight, I completed the mission," Aria said. Her voice didn't rise. She didn't look up. It wasn't a dismissal. It was a conclusion. The officer nodded once. There was nothing else to ask. Later, after sunset, the base went quiet. Sodium lamps glowed dimly over the ramp. The hum of cooling systems whined under the silence. Most personnel had settled in. Only maintenance crews moved slowly between the hangars, checking inventory, prepping flight lines for morning flights. Aria walked out of the barracks alone. Her hair was still pulled back in a single tight braid. Her flight suit had been changed. Her boots had been cleaned, but their noses were scuffed. Her gloves hung from her belt. She walked past the empty aircraft parked near the tower and veered off to the far line. A fresh F-16 was waiting at the edge of the runway. Its fuselage was clean, untouched by heat or soot. Its thermal blanket was still clinging to the canopy. A small crew had run diagnostics earlier, but they were gone now. The area was empty. Aria approached without changing her pace. Her footsteps echoed faintly on the concrete. She walked past the ladder without pausing. The helmet she was carrying stayed at her side. The checklist was still folded in her hand. It had never been used. She hadn't needed it. She stopped a few feet from the nose of the aircraft and tilted her head back. Above, the sky was clear. Stars were beginning to show through the last haze of heat. They twinkled faintly, distant and undisturbed. Aria didn't smile. She didn't sigh. She just looked. The aircraft waited behind her. The checklist remained folded, and Aria stood as quiet and ready as she had that morning when she launched.